Hello again, Thoreau fans. Corinne Smith here, beginning to talk today about other nature writers. Why? Because when I first read this copy of Walden back in 1975 when I was a senior in high school, what appealed to me most was Thoreau's close attention to nature. Yes, of course, I admired him for his independence and for his nonconformity, but nature also. Yes. I was a Girl Scout. I had been a Girl Scout from brownies through seniors. And don't look too closely at those badges. I was about to spend 2 summers as a camp counselor at a Girl Scout residential camp. So I was already paying at least a little bit of attention to nature myself. And I had aspirations of doing even more. And that's what resounded most with me with Thoreau and Walden. And when I bought this book with my allowance, ironically and coincidentally, at the Walden bookstore at the Park City Mall in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I noticed 2 other books on adjacent shelves that seemed to be calling my name. Edward Abbey's Desert Solitaire and a Sand County Almanac by Aldo, Leopold. Every time I went back to that store, I saw copies of these books there. I hope somebody was buying some. I kept running into these books, the titles, references, seeing them in bookstores, and I didn't buy them right away, but of course I did eventually, and I did eventually buy them and read them, and I'm glad I did. Their pull was so strong I could not avoid it. So these are the first 2 books, sort of tangentially, that Henry David Thoreau led me to. Now, since then, I have had many nature books come my way, and there are many nature books on my personal library shelves, too many to even show you at all. But I thought maybe some of you out there had similar experiences. After all, one book inevitably leads to another and another and another. What nature books did Henry lead you to? Feel free to share your comments below. So let's start today with a general discussion about nature writing and where to find it. And then I plan to follow up this video with at least 2 more where I suggest specific authors and specific books. And so this general discussion is labeled Part 1. Now, when you dive into the realm of nature writing, the person who often pops up first is an 18th century Englishman named Gilbert White. White was known as a parson naturalist. He worked in the ministry, he was also a gardener who grew all kinds of vegetables, and he started keeping track of the weather and what happened at certain times of the year and how it affected all of his plantings. And he called this his garden calendar with a K. Does that sound familiar? Doesn't that sound pretty much like what Thoreau was doing with the plants of Concord, keeping track of when they bloomed, all that kind of stuff? Yeah, although he focused mostly on the wild ones and not necessarily on the garden varieties. Anyway, Gilbert White was somebody who paid close attention to his little part of the natural world. He watched and studied birds and animals while they were alive and not as stuffed specimens in museums. This was unusual at the time. And White corresponded with several other like-minded gentlemen about what he saw and what was happening in his neighborhood. Some of this correspondence was published as The Natural History and Antiquities of Selborne in the county of Southampton. First published in 1789, it is one of the all-time best-selling books in the UK. It has never been out of print. This particular copy is from 1911, and it is illustrated. It is illustrated. Let me read to you one of Gilbert White's letters, the beginnings of one of Gilbert White's letters. Oh, by the way, Henry David Thoreau did own a copy of this book. His was published in London in 1851. And you can find references to Gilbert White of Selborne in Thoreau's writings. So he did read at least parts of this book. So let me read you one of his letters, or the beginning of one of his letters. to Thomas Pennant, Esquire, Selborne, 1771. Dear Sir, happening to make a visit to my neighbor's peacocks, I could not help observing that the trains of those magnificent birds appear by no means to be their tails, those large feathers growing not from their Europygium, but all up their backs. A range of short brown stiff feathers, about 6 inches long, fixed in the Europygium, is the real tail, and serves as the fulcrum to prop the train, which is long and top-heavy when set on end. When the train is up, nothing appears of the bird before but its head and neck, and parts of its body. But this would not be the case were those long feathers fixed only in the rump, as may be seen by the turkey cock when in a strutting attitude. By a strong muscular vibration, these birds can make the shafts of their long feathers clatter like the swords of a sword dancer. They then trample very quick with their feet and run backwards towards the females. Okay. Why am I reading this about peacocks? Because he mentioned turkeys. It reminded me so much of the turkeys that we see at Walden Pond State Reservation in the late afternoon when they come walking through. It's usually a male and 2 or 3 females. Have you ever gotten close enough to a turkey? Now, you might not have peacocks at your disposal, but have you ever gotten close enough to a turkey, wild or domestic, when it fans out its feathers and then pulls them back in? Or fans out its feathers and pulls them back in? I highly recommend it. It is amazing. Be slow and careful. Don't be threatening. Wild turkeys, you can usually get close enough to them that you can hear the sound that the feathers make when they open and close. It is amazing. It is like somebody shuffling cards, you know, how you shuffle cards that way, backwards and forwards. Or somebody opening up a fan with a quick flick of the wrist. That's what it sounds like. It is very cool. So, it turns out that even though 250 years divide us, Gilbert White and I are both looking at the backsides of big birds. You gotta love it. But isn't this one reason why we read nature writing? Why it appeals to us? You can read what somebody else sees and does in nature, and then you can go out and maybe have a similar experience, or maybe you've already had a similar experience and you can already connect with the author. You can read what Henry Thoreau wrote about a certain plant or an animal or a place. You can find that plant, animal, or place, and you might be able to see the same phenomenon for yourself. Finding connection, both with nature, which is highly important, and also with this other person from maybe across years or across the country or the world. To me, this is what it's all about. But we're not supposed to be talking about Thoreau here today. We're moving on to other nature writers. So, how do you find these other nature writers? Well, you could be like me, and whenever I go to a new or used bookstore, I head right for the nature aisle. That's how I found Gilbert White of Selborne. Used bookstores are especially great because in this respect they almost always will have copies of the standards in the field, which we will get to in the next episode. Looking for nature writing books in libraries can be tricky because they'll be shelved in a bunch of different places depending on what the focus is and what the original catalogers thought the focus was. What was most important to the book. That's just the way we librarians are. However, in a library that uses the Dewey Decimal System, which is most public and school libraries, look for the 500 section, that's where science is, and then look at 2 different places around the number 508 and around the number 574 or 574.5. I think you will find some worthy books in those areas, and they will turn you on to others. If you want a more systematic or comprehensive approach, and one that you can use either in the comfort of your own living room or sitting on a rock by a gurgling stream, then you can consult books. that address nature writing and nature writers as a whole. These come in two different varieties. The first are ones that talk about considerations of nature and nature writing over the years, and they address them in a narrative form. The other option is to look for anthologies and collections of those nature writings. Now, in my library, I have 1.5 shelves of all of these kinds of things. I can't show them all, but I did pull out a couple of good representatives from the past that might help you, and that you might have even heard of. For books that give the wider view, the narrative, I offer Wilderness and the American Mind by Roderick, Frazier, Nash. First published in 1967. This is the 4th edition from 2001. A 5th edition was published in 2014, and it is still available. This is Nash's classic study of America's changing attitudes toward wilderness over the years. It has been called the Book of Genesis for environmentalists. You get a book like this, and you page through, and you look at the table of contents, and names that pop out at you right away are Henry David Thoreau, John Muir, and Aldo Leopold, right off the bat. It's been a long time since I read the 3rd edition of this book. It was part of my own exploration of nature and wildness and wilderness, and I was pointed in various directions because of it. So I highly recommend Roderick, Frazier, Nash, Wilderness and the American Mind. Any of the editions will do, and you'll find them in used bookstores. Another book along this road is Nature's Economy, A History of Ecological Ideas by Donald Worcester, W-O-R-S-T-E-R. This is the 2nd edition, which came out in 1994. It is still available today. You will still find authors referencing this book. As soon as they say Donald Worcester, this is the book. This is the book. The book traces the origins of the concept of ecology, discusses the thinkers who have shaped it, shows how it in turn has shaped the modern perception of our place in nature. It includes portraits of Linnaeus, Gilbert White, Darwin, Thoreau, and such key 20th century ecologists as Rachel Carson, Frederick Clemens, Aldo Leopold, James Lovelock, and Eugene Odom. So, Donald Worcester takes the longer and international approach. This is something to consider in your own reading schedule. Do you want to stick with nature writers who are in your own region or in places that you're familiar with, or would you like to expand your horizons and read something different, something that you don't know at all, something you're not familiar with? Okay, those are the kinds of things to think about. Both of these books will offer you background and some information about authors to read next, or people who, well, anyway, they will provide excellent background for you. If you have more favorites along these lines of these books, please feel free to mention them below. Now, what about the second? Anthologies and collections of nature writing. Again, I have many examples, including old reference books that libraries discarded. I have many examples on my shelves. I'm choosing to show some of the best, and I do believe the mother lode is the Norton Book of Nature Writing, compiled by Robert Finch and John Elder. First came out in 1990, and it is out of print. How can that be? I don't know. This is the hardcover edition. I'm pretty sure there was a paperback also issued. And unlike some Norton anthologies, these are not thin skin pages. These are regular pages here. It is a true smorgasbord of nature writing. As usual with Norton anthologies, it is chronological with the selections. They begin with Gilbert White of Selborne and pass through the years and end with Terry Tempest Williams. Nearly 100 writers are represented here. Lots of familiar names, others that you might not recognize at all. It is a great place to start. And if you don't know the editors, Robert Finch and John Elder, they're good people to reference too. Robert Finch, longtime Thoreauvian, lives on Cape Cod still, has a number of books to his credit, all based on Cape Cod and surveying nature in Cape Cod. This is a primal place, one of his many. John Elder, longtime professor at Middlebury College, still lives in Vermont, still lives in New England. Reading the Mountains of Home is his classic work, along with other short pieces that you'll find in other places. So even just this book with the rest of their stuff could supply you with a lifetime of reading, right? Norton Anthology. Why is it out of print? We need another one. Somebody do that. I don't have time to. Somebody out there do it. Okay, another anthology I found on my shelf is American Environmentalism, Readings in Conservation History, again compiled by Roderick, Frazier, Nash. This is the 3rd edition, which came out in 1990, now out of print. And the focus here is on conservation. And again, how people view or use or choose to protect the land or choose not to. The selections in here are both chronological and thematic, and you will recognize some names here, but maybe not many. This one could expand your horizons even more than the Norton Anthology. If you are an avid reader of Orion magazine, you might find some common ground here. And if you're not familiar with Orion magazine, maybe you want to check it out online at orionmagazine.org. I don't have any connection with it. I'm just mentioning it as a suggestion and an option. Of course, if you donate money to any nature-related organization, you're going to get their regular periodicals like Sierra or Nature Conservancy, and these provide great contemporary writings, sometimes book reviews to point you in directions of other places, and often use famous writers to supply articles, again, leading you in different directions and educating you at the same time. You know, people who are interested in nature are very smart. They read a lot, they study a lot. Anyway, okay. One more book from the shelf that I thought I should mention is This Incomparable Land, a book of nature, American nature writing, compiled by Thomas J. Lyon, came out in 1989. It is a combination of the narrative and the anthology. It has about a 100-page introduction about the form, and then it includes selected writings, chronological, American, from William Wood, William Bartram, John James Audubon, moving ahead until it ends with Barry Lopez and John Hay. 22 authors represented here. The title phrase, This Incomparable Land, is a quote from a book published in 1563 in London called The Whole and True Discovery of Terra Florida, written by French naval officer Jean Ribault, who had explored the coastline of the American Southeast from about present-day South Carolina down to Florida. And so, and he did this in the mid-1500s and wrote about it. Anyway, that's where the title comes from, This Incomparable Land. You know what? Now I'm wondering if I should have defined the term nature writing from the beginning. Well, because it has different aspects to it. It's just true nature observation, creatively written, or conservation, environmentalism, which puts, you know, additional, I don't want to say baggage, additional aspects to it. But anyway, I like what Thoreau did. Going out into the landscape, observing some part of nature, finding it fascinating, writing it all down, thinking of how humans can relate to it, maybe using metaphors and similes so that they understand the connections and what everything means in the long run. Is that enough to go on? I hope so. That's what I like. The thing is, when you're tuned into the instances of nature writing, you can find it almost anywhere. It can prove to yourself that somebody else was paying close attention to their immediate environment. They're paying closer attention than most people would. It's almost like letting you in on a little secret, except that it isn't really a secret, and it might turn out to not to be little at all. And it could be about a flower, a tree, an animal, an insect, entire landscape, or even about the weather. I had this experience about a year ago when I was listening to an autobiography on CDs during my daily commute. The writer was telling his life story, narrating the book himself. He is not known as a nature writer. But after he read one specific paragraph about one specific incident, I found it to be such a powerful description, I had to smack the off button on the CD and just sit there in my car and say, wow. Wow. Unfortunately, the paragraph was close enough to the beginning of the CD that I started it again, and I listened to that one paragraph again and just, again, smacked it off and said, wow. So let me read it to you, although it won't be the same because it won't be in his voice. Let's set the stage. It's the early 1970s, and the author and his friend Tinker are driving from the East Coast to the West Coast. Along the way, I think maybe in Texas, they pick up another passenger, a belly dancer. And then they hit the Rocky Mountains in winter. One night the road vanished before our eyes. There was so much snow it was impossible to tell the location of the highway's shoulder. We had chains on our tires, but we still did plenty of ice skating over some very treacherous terrain. Our belly dancing gal pal was getting pretty nervous, so we pulled to a stop. Tinker and I got out on a high mountain pass where there were no other cars visible. There was just a city of snow falling from the sky and gathering around us. It was quiet, dead desert quiet. A truly heavy snowfall can be unnerving. Back east, we usually experience the freedom that comes with a good snowstorm. No work, no school, the world shutting its big mouth for a while, the dirty streets covered over in virgin white. Like all the missteps you've taken have been erased by nature. You can't run, you can only sit. You open your door on a trackless world, your old path, your history, momentarily covered over by a landscape of forgiveness, a place where something new might happen. It's an illusion, but it can stimulate the regenerative parts of your spirit to make good on God and nature's suggestion. A lot of snow, however, I mean a whole lot, is a different thing. That feeling of freeness turns to confinement. The sheer physical weight of the snow becomes existential, and the dread of a dark, covered world sets in. I've felt it twice. Once in Idaho, where it snowed circus clowns for 72 hours, all power and light gone, eternal night and judgment day upon us. The other was that highway evening on the pass. There was too much quiet, too much weight, too few boundaries, and no dimension. The world had been planed down into a snow-blind table you could easily slide off the edge of. It had been simplified into the passable and impassable. The early ocean map makers had it right. The world was flat, and a wrong move too far to the left or right could bring you to the brink of the abyss, and beyond, there be monsters. I still get chills. I still get chills reading and hearing this passage. I don't know that I've ever heard or read a more succinct definition of the differences of snow and how they affect us. I've thought about that for a long time. Here's somebody who put it into words. And I still get chills. And it's not because it's about winter. Who wrote it? Bruce Springstein in his memoir, Born to Run. Chapter 22, page 160, in case you're interested. Bruce is an accomplished writer, a musician, a performer, and above all, someone who pays close attention to what's going on around him, and then he conveys what he sees in detail, puts his own creative spin on it with words and phrases that are unique to him. I mean, it snowed circus clowns for 72 hours. We could discuss this metaphor for a very long time. It's not the way you or I would have described that scene, but it sure makes its point, even puts a little bit of humor spin on it, And if you have been trapped in a house in a blizzard for more than a day, or if you have been driving in a whiteout, which I have done twice and survived, you will understand this. Some people won't get it. It snowed, circus clowns. I don't understand. No. He could have simply said, it snowed for 3 days straight. No, he's not going to say it that way. He's more creative, more imaginative, more descriptive than that, and he paints a powerful image with this particular choice of words. And he knows that it's going to resonate with his audience. They're going to understand it. Most of them are going to understand it. Powerful stuff from someone I didn't expect. But then again, maybe I do. Anyway, nature writing, keep your eyes and ears open. It will show up into your life and you will find it anywhere. Now, I've given you some options about finding examples of nature writing, finding names of nature writers. You can certainly start running with some of them, perhaps with the Norton anthology. That's the best way, I think, or just going to a used bookstore and heading for the nature aisle. In our next episode, we will cover 7 authors, American authors, whom I consider to be the foundation in this field. And we will cover even more nature writers in the subsequent video after that. So stay tuned. I'm Corinne Smith. Thanks again for joining me today. Now go out and do some nature explorations on your own, okay? Before you sit down with the books, before you go to the bookstore, okay? And maybe you should even write about it.